Coming up on this week's Elder Scrolls Weekly, we discuss everything we know about dungeons in the Elder Scrolls Online, we look at the latest information about large group PvE, and we exchange our favourite Elder Scrolls moments. But before all that, there's this. Hello and a warm Red Mountain welcome to this week's Elder Scrolls Weekly, your weekly source of everything Elder Scrolls. I'm joined again by the Daedric Longbow of games journalism, Mr. Andy Kelly.
Hello.
How's your Turdas?
Yeah,
been so far?
Pretty good, yeah.
Good.
I had to think what you meant there, and I realised that that's the Tamrielic days of the week.
Of course.
So happy Turdas
to everyone.
Yeah. And while we're here, while I'm talking to you now, and while you're listening, you should follow us on Twitter. Yes?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Because we'll be giving updates on there, and also you can follow Olaf on Twitter. So our Twitter
is Tamriel Herald. That's all one word. Yep, should be on the screen.
And Olaf's Twitter is Olaf Skyrim, where there will be updates from Olaf himself, and there'll be updates on the other one from us about future shows and other happenings.
Yep, and we've got a really good show lined up for you today. Please hit subscribe on the screen now and you'll stay informed of everything that we've got lined up. In the next 2 weeks as well, we're going to be going hands-on with the game, so do hit subscribe now and you'll be on top of all of that. Today we're going to be telling you everything we know so far about dungeons. We've got a bit of fresh info about the large-scale PvE stuff at the end of the game. And we're not allowed to use the dirty R word, and we'll be picking our favourite Elder Scrolls moments and asking you to share yours as well. So that's all coming up, stay tuned. Okay, so we're going to start off talking about dungeons now. Obviously dungeons are like a staple part of all MMOs, but yeah. I guess the intention here is to probably find that middle ground between the stuff that people are familiar with from sort of the old Elder Scrolls games and also providing something new and a little bit interesting for sort of MMO fans. Yeah. So where do you stand on what you've seen about them so far?
Well, they said that to fit the MMO nature of the game, the dungeons aren't going to be so much about navigation and more about combat encounters. So like your average MMO dungeon is just a series of fights. So you go to a big chamber, you go to a narrow corridor, you go to whatever, and the skill in them is knowing how to deal with each environment, you know. Whereas in regular Elder Scrolls, part of the dungeons are finding your way around the maze-like, you know, ancient Nordic ruins, triggering traps, solving those rotatey animal symbol puzzles. You know, so there'll be none of that. They're saying that it's more like an MMO where it's combat, it's fighting. You know, so. But obviously they'll be themed depending on which part of the world you're in. You know, so if you're in Skyrim, it will be the familiar sort of catacombs and so on. So yeah, I mean, they're obviously keeping it pretty standard for the MMO style of dungeon, which is fine, but you know, you kind of, I think maybe I'll miss a little bit of that feeling of, you know, being wary of what lies around the next corner for, you know, spike traps being triggered and stuff like that, and puzzles to solve. But it doesn't really work in an MMO. If you've got like a group of players standing around solving puzzles, it's not really a great fit, is it? No,
I think it'd be a little bit strange, and it sort of surprised me a little bit that in the recent sort of Q&A and sort of blog posts that they did, they were kind of at pains to not go back on something they mentioned before, but they did sort of break down player roles into sort of three categories, and previously they kind of expressed their desire to, you know, offer something new and let people do whatever they want. So we did sort of see the three kind of, the sort of Holy Trinity come up in a small extent.
Which is tank, healing, DPS.
Yeah.
But they did say that the difference is that if you're playing in World of Warcraft and your healer goes down, you're in a bad spot. The idea here is that because you can mix and match skills, it means that if a healer goes down, the DPS guy can put his sword away and pull out a healing staff and act as healer.
I mean, potentially there's room there for everyone to be like your off healer.
Yeah,
if they're spec'd that way.
Which is quite, is an interesting dynamic. It could change the way it works in an interesting way and make it feel less restrictive. Where if you go in as a healer, you're like, well, I'm just going to be running around as backup. You might be able to whip out a double-handed sword and wade in if the situation arises. So that could be quite interesting.
It would be nice. It's an interesting way of keeping it fresh. I mean, looking at the healing rule specifically, it's a bit different because of the way that the monsters work. In the same article, they talked about the fact that, when you attack a sort of pack of monsters, they don't sort of conform to the normal aggro rules that you'd find in an MMO. So they will each be picking a certain person and attacking that person. And
they don't all just go for the tank.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the kind of the idea of sort of there is taunting, I think, and there is a way of sort of controlling aggro, but it does seem as well that that first hit is going to be everyone's going for everyone. So I think the role of the healer especially in terms of area of effect heals, is going to be slightly different because I think everyone's going to be taking damage to start with. So it could be slightly interesting in that respect. And I think, as far as we know, there's only one class, which is the Templar, that has a sort of a single person heal. I'll come on to talk about the tanks in a little bit, but can you sort of see people like doing the whole kind of optimal spec for characters and sort of picking the Templar, going for the single person heal while someone else goes for tank? And while you have this amazing array of potential options with your characters, do you think people will naturally just fall back into the kind of classic?
Yeah, I can see what happens with an MMO is it quite quickly gets reduced to numbers by min-maxers who are obsessed with having the most perfect build possible. So you get more, I won't say casual because of the stigma that word has, but more players who care less about min-maxing will probably be more likely to mix and match their skills and stuff. But I think if a player's really hardline, I want to create the most efficient, powerful build, they will probably end up sticking to these single roles. So I guess the options there for both. If you want to be a super hardcore healer, then you'll go straight down maybe the Templar path because that's the only one that allows single target healing. But if you were playing, you have a more fun approach to it, then you might go, I'll be a healer stroke, mage or whatever. So yeah,
I think I can see either one working out because of course everyone's got these underlying abilities. Everyone can sort of block, dodge, roll. They can maybe sort of stun and interrupt. There are kind of underlying skills that everyone has that maybe make just sort of being a mixed character a little bit more viable. And of course, I think potentially the most interesting thing is seeing how people optimize these things in ways that you perhaps don't imagine. So you could see a sorcerer that's kind of conjuring Daedra and doing crowd control and things like that, but perhaps doing healing as well. And on what we know already, there's perhaps even a small chance that although the Templar is the one with the sort of the healing path, it doesn't necessarily mean it might be the most efficient path for sort of group sort of healing and encounters.
Yeah, so I think with every role there's going to be a limit that makes you want to experiment with other stuff. That's all insane balancing that ZeniMax Online are going to have to spend a lot of time tweaking. And when the game comes out, there's going to be lots of balancing issues, and there's going to be patches, and there's going to be angry people in the forums going, this specific healing spell is imbalanced and I refuse to play the game.
There literally already are. There's people doing that now, and we're 10 months away and we're sort of talking about it as if we can definitively say if it's a good or bad thing. We really can't, can we? There's going to
be tons of stuff wrong with it when it first comes out. That is the fact of life with MMOs. As people start playing the PvP, they're going to find balancing issues. There was issues with the Old Republic with timing of attacks where the timing was off and it was affecting the balancing of. So there's the stuff problems that won't emerge until the game's actually out. But I think for most players who aren't so much into the hardcore min-maxing and PvP won't really care that much. A lot of players will just be doing PvE and exploring and stuff. It won't matter to them as much. But for the really competitive players, there's going to be a lot of issues here. But I think the ZeniMax Online is made up of MMO veterans who've worked on Dark Age of Camelot and stuff. So they've had a lot of experience with this, and they've had a lot of experience with notoriously demanding MMO audiences who will really tear you apart if you get something wrong. And that stuff can really damage the game's reputation, so they're going to be keen to patch it. I think there's going to be a fairly big patch quite soon after it's released, addressing issues. But yeah, I guess we can't really tell at the moment how these systems are going to work together when you've got this mixed class thing. You've got more creativity with characters. Usually an MMO is stuck into archetypes. You've got this type of character, this and this. Having this bit of freedom, it might make it really dynamic and exciting, or it might turn it into a big old mess. So I'm sure I'm sure the studio is thinking of exactly this, and they are made up of talented people who will hopefully be able to turn this into something a bit more interesting than your usual MMO class system.
Awesome. If we sort of leave classes and sort of player roles there a little bit, because I think we could talk for hours about that,
yeah.
and get nowhere. Again, this is something that they recently spoke about, the way that the monsters will work in the dungeons and things. I'm sort of cautious of using the word mobs, because I realise perhaps half the people out there are maybe Elder Scrolls fans.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think you forget that there's going to be a lot of people coming to this who it's the first MMO because they just want more Elder Scrolls. So yeah. Also,
it's a word that they seem to have, as far as I could see, like actively ignored in all the stuff that they've said, which is fair enough.
But yeah, enemies will behave differently to your average MMO. But maybe for Elder Scrolls fans, it'll feel more natural because they'll have a similar. They'll be able to deal with them in a similar way because there's dodging and there's backstepping and stuff like that. So
I think you do get sort of accustomed to like a rhythm of fighting enemies in an MMO that perhaps you wouldn't have done if you were sort of more used to traditional RPGs. Yeah. And it sounds like they're sort of trying to replicate that in some of the things they do. They talk about like this pack mentality where the monsters will sort of attack you according to when you attack them and proximity and things like that. So it seems to be a little bit less binary than some MMOs are in terms of sort of aggro and sort of distance from things. But
that's part of. They said that they want you to be looking at the enemies, not looking at the hotbar, because then you don't even have to look at the enemies in World of Warcraft. You're just hitting your number keys on your on your quick slot bar, ding 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 ding. Whereas here they want you to look at the enemies and look at dodging and blocking and timing and stuff, which makes it feel more like Elder Scrolls than World of Warcraft, which is, in theory, which worked really well. It must be hard to keep that in control with lag and everything to think about.
I guess it's all about sort of building a framework that looks and feels like you're doing that, rather than sort of like unashamedly showing someone sort of numbers and stats.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things that I read, that sort of, and it sounds clever, but actually when you look a little bit deeper into it, it's sort of slightly ridiculous. Is that all the monsters don't all attack at once, and there's like a back line, like a sort of second tier of
like
monsters.
Hang back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that's justifiable, or like from sort of a kind of a fantasy perspective, is that just nonsense?
I don't know. I mean, it makes it feel more like they're things with minds as opposed to just automatons rushing at the nearest tank. I don't know how it's going to work, because anyone who plays MMOs and has done dungeons knows that you kite enemies. You nudge forward until one of the group is aggroed and runs towards you, and you deal with that, and you nudge forward again and manage them that way. I don't know if they're going to get around that by having more intelligent enemies, because I always find that the kiting process, whilst efficient, quite boring, where you're like one by one just drawing enemies out, dealing with them. Maybe here it'll be better because they'll be more reactive, and they'll feel more like a genuine adversary, as opposed to just a robot that you're trying to game and trying to confuse.
I think in all of this, I definitely hope that's the way they go, but I think in all of this you need to bear in mind the fact that in all of the Elder Scrolls games, you can never really say the combat was the most engaging thing. A lot of the time you're running backwards, sort of trying not to get hit. And I remember many hours of Morrowind spent running backwards through dungeons, sort of trying to not be killed by things. And it's like the exploration has always been a bigger part of it for me. And if they can sort of even just make it satisfactory and still give you that element of exploring this giant sort of bustling world, then that's great. But from what I've read, things like the fact that certain enemies attack the same sort of types and things like that, so you're going to have like a ranged battle going on whilst the melee people are sort of smashing into each other at the front and things, potentially means that it could be quite an engaging experience. And as you said before, it's definitely the main thrust of the dungeons. It's, you know, it is combat focused. It's less exploratory,
which is where I think for Elder Scrolls fans, and is what is worrying me slightly about the game, is that it will be so focused on combat. And as you said, Elder Scrolls, I don't like the series because of the combat. You know, it's there. It's better in Skyrim than it was in Oblivion, but it's still not brilliant. You know, it's not the reason you play it. You play it to be immersed and to explore and all that. So if Elder Scrolls Online's too slanted towards combat, I can see it alienating some Elder Scrolls fans who've joined the game to do Elder Scrollsy stuff.
Yeah.
So
I think the one sort of amazing bit of combat in Skyrim, which is also simultaneously completely immersion breaking, is, have you ever done any sort of finishing moves with the unarmed skill?
No.
It's incredible. It just goes full WWE. So
like
they're doing
wrestling
like choke
moves,
slams and sort of DDTs
Yeah.
and things like that. It's pretty special.
Yeah.
I don't expect we'll see that in this.
No. I wonder if there will be an unarmed skill in it.
I can't see how they do it.
I can't really see a player in the Cyrodiil PvP arena rushing in with his fists, fighting a guy with a double-handed sword. But you know,
monk-like disarming.
Yeah,
people.
they could have like a sort of Baldur's Gate style monk where you can like use the quivering palm and stun them and stuff. But I wouldn't really feel very Elder Scrolls, would it?
I don't know, the idea of like a sort of a Khajiit doing quivering palm, quivering paw. Sorry. Sort of moving on to a slightly related area from that, and this is a bit of a sort of a woolly one considering the history of what we've heard about Elder Scrolls Online. We're talking about instancing and phasing and sort of telling a story, and also about public dungeons, because at the moment it seems a little bit woolly as far as I'm concerned. So, like, group dungeons are clearly a big thing. You've got the four-party dungeons. As far as I can tell from what I've read, they are going to be instanced, but there is still room in the world for public dungeons. Is that what you understood from what you've read?
Yeah, I don't really understand that either. It seems that they're talking about there's going to be open dungeons, which were in EverQuest.
So real sort of first-gen kind of MMO stuff.
But then also having instances. I don't know how that's going to work. Maybe there's blocks off rooms where there'll be a group dungeon, but then like you enter a certain boss arena and it'll be instanced for your party or whatever. I don't know. They're being unclear about that. I'm not sure how it's going to work. But
just for the people that perhaps haven't played old MMOs or don't play any MMOs at all, have you got sort of a pithy way of describing public dungeons? So I guess basically it's a dungeon that is persistent, that anyone can get involved in. So.
And an instance is, for us that don't know what an instance is, it's like a moment that only you see, or you and a certain group of players see, where it's like a set, whereas a big open area in an MMO is full of players who are all seeing the same thing. An instance is an area or an event or a location that is one instance that you see from your perspective, but other players don't. So how they're going to marry instanced areas with open areas seems quite confusing at the moment. They've not done a very good job of explaining it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll sort of maybe touch on that in a bit and come back to it. But while we're talking about instances and people seeing a certain thing, the other thing that they've spoken about is phasing or layering, as these developers call it, which is this sort of, it's something that World of Warcraft started doing around sort of Lich King and did to a greater extent in Cataclysm, and obviously you see it in the Old Republic and things like that. The sort of the idea that two people are looking at the same place but seeing different sort of parts of the story going on. Do you have sort of any personal experience of that? And also, do you think, is it sort of immersion breaking? Will it push players apart, or do you think it's a sort of an effective way of telling a story in an MMO?
Yeah, well, I didn't really notice it a lot, and Old Republic had a lot of phasing. It didn't really phase me. Hey. I think I said in the last episode that they've got around this kind of by players will see different things. So where you see one NPC, like a party NPC that's accompanying you, the other player who has that NPC with them won't see the NPC. They'll see a randomly generated stock character. So they seem to be dealing with the immersion breaking element of it. It just depends on how artfully they can, put phasing in there, because it's a thing that can either look really jarring or you just don't notice it. So it's all down to design smart design and making them not feel intrusive.
I wonder sort of feasibly as well how far they can push it, because like Elder Scrolls especially sort of, well, actually since Morrowind I think, and perhaps before, is always about like big dynamic choices, and different paths, and you'll go one way and you'll alienate one group of people. I think we're less likely to see sort of physical changes to the world that will sort of, that only you can see. But story-wise, do you think, can you see any branching? Is that going to be possible?
Yeah, the missions, the quests I did when I played it had branching paths, but it seems like they only affected the root of the quest. It didn't seem like it was affecting the world at large. Like I was doing quests for the King of Daggerfall, and the stuff I was doing was changing his opinion of me and was changing the course of the quest, but it didn't feel like it. I don't think you could have things affecting the larger world, because it wouldn't make sense, for players to change something in the world. If every player was doing it, it wouldn't make sense to just But then it could use phasing there, where you will see the change to the world, but other players won't.
It becomes mind-bogglingly complicated.
Yeah, it sounds really complex. I think the choices and the paths and the sort of branching storylines will all be contained in quests and won't so much affect the larger world. I think the PvP stuff is the stuff that will affect the world, with who's in control of parts of Cyrodiil and stuff.
I mean, that is something we've spoken about briefly before. I think that is a great sort of end game to be aiming for. Like, if you are that engaged in your particular faction, the promise of control at the end of it, however brief, is a really, really good sort of carrot to dangle in front of players. Yeah. If we sort of briefly return to the public thing, just because I think if they can pull it off, it seems like the most Elder Scrollsy way of putting dungeons in a game. That, like, the sort of the way they've justified it in interviews I've read, is that you have these areas that are full of enemies, and you'll have to push your way through, and you're sort of fighting, and it's getting very difficult. And then you'll have an area where you sort of go and heal and rest. And the idea is you might bump into another character who you'll then push on and do the rest of the dungeon with.
Yeah, like other players.
Yeah.
Which is like when in Skyrim, when you go to the tavern and hire an NPC, it's that, it's like the classic fantasy thing of hiring mercenaries and banding together and stuff. So it'll be like that, but with real people. Yeah,
I mean, if that works, it would be sort of amazing. It'd be like Journey with battle axes.
Yeah. That was what's good about Guild Wars, where you find yourself teaming up with random people and you get the same amount of experience. Whereas World of Warcraft and other similar games, you can team up with people, but it doesn't have so much. You don't feel like you're contributing; you just feel like you're tagging along.
I think the crucial thing here, when you talk about group mechanics, is getting that sort of organic way of forming groups. I guess public dungeons are perhaps the way they can possibly do that. I think there has to be like a looking for group mechanic. And I'm sure,
there definitely will be. And there'll be like local chat where you can say, there'll be people standing outside the dungeon, going LFG, blah blah blah, whatever,
dancing, wearing no clothes.
Yeah.
But if there is a chance that you could stumble into like a fellow adventure and do it, I think that's where this could potentially really give you like a large scale Elder Scrolls feel to that MMO world.
Yeah, definitely.
Otherwise, I think there is the danger in everything that we've looked at so far in it feeling very, very MMO, which is going to alienate some people. Okay, so the last thing we're going to quickly talk about is the PvE end game and the sort of the ultimate end to what the dungeons could be. You may have previously read some stuff about this, calling it adventure zones, which is still a word that they throw about, but I'm not sure how viable it still is. Matt Fearow did an interview with Buffed last week, where they asked him about whether or not they're going to be raids. Now, raids is sort of a word that they seem to have actively avoided in any interviews that I've read. But there does seem to be like a drive to do multi-big group end game PvE, which is a horrible term that they've used for it. How important do you think this is, Andy, to like an MMO? Is it crucial because it's a big part of the likes of WoW?
Yeah, raids are massive, and one of the most kind of challenging ways to play the game, where you need like a massive group of players all working in sync, cooperating with headsets and really doing the tactic and not Leroy Jenkinsing it or whatever. I think it'd be important to have that. Old Republic had its flashpoints where you'd go in and fight really difficult enemies and big tough bosses. I think it doesn't need it, and if they're going to have it, then good. It'll be. Yeah, it seems like the standard MMO thing that it needs to have, I think.
I think they're trying to make it a bit different, which sounds interesting, in that they're going to have sort of areas, I think, that you perhaps have a warning when you go in there that sort of tells you that you're entering one of these areas that's going to be significantly more difficult, that perhaps requires a number of people. But they seem to be, again, at pains to avoid the raid word, because it sort of conjures up images of 40-foot demons and things like that. I'm not entirely certain that they'll completely do away with that altogether, because for the PvE endgame, there does seem to be enough kind of horrible creatures in the Elder Scrolls lore that you would end up fighting something big and nasty.
Yeah, and it ties into the story where if you end up fighting some big Daedric beasts or whatever.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that I read is that this is going to be one of the last things they develop before release. Is that absolute madness?
Well, I think that, along with Dungeons and PvP, it's one of the things that needs the most balancing and play testing, so it kind of makes sense, they leave that to the end to make sure, it's probably got people testing it religiously right now. They probably hired some really hardcore WoW raiders to test it, So yeah, I think it makes sense that they leave that kind of thing to the end. They're probably still tweaking PvP. They'll be still tweaking PvP right up until and beyond release as well when
forever.
They're patching it. Yeah.
The only other sort of nugget that we've got regarding the endgame is that of the dungeons that there are, we believe there's there's a 4-player dungeon in each of the 16 zones, and almost all of those dungeons also have a heroic mode for the level 50s. So potentially, I think endgame wise, when you add it to the stuff that we briefly touched on last week about you're going to be able to sort of do new game plus essentially in different faction areas and stuff, you're going to have a lot of stuff to do when you hit level 50. So that'll be really interesting to see. Right, I think we've pretty much covered everything we can in Dungeons there. I think maybe something a little bit light-hearted to end with, and what we thought about doing now was a call to action, really, in terms of your greatest Elder Scrolls moments, because everyone, I think, has their own story of a particular moment that stands out.
It's like an anecdote generator, because there's so much, there's so many mad physics and random moments, and everyone's got an Elder Scrolls story or a favourite, part of quest or whatever.
I'm worried now that, thinking of all the amazing potential physics stories that people are going to come out with, that my one's going to be really, really dull. But I'll let you start, Andy.
Well, I think one of my standout Elder Scrolls moments isn't so much a random mad collusion of physics or anything, but it's more of a quest moment. I remember in Oblivion where you end up delving inside a painting. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it wasn't the best quest in terms of design, because you just go in and whack some painted trolls and come out again. But I remember being really surprised by it, and I kind of missed that madness. That a lot of Skyrim's quests were quite straightforward compared to that, where you end up inside a painting and the world around you looks hand painted, and it was really mad and weird. And I kind of missed that, because you're in Elder Scrolls world where anything's possible, and there's all these crazy Daedric princes, and I thought a bit of that was missing. So I always, whenever I think about Elder Scrolls questing, I always think of that, and I think that was brilliant. Yeah,
it's a pretty particularly good moment. I think you're right that maybe, I don't think Skyrim was po-faced, but I certainly remember from Morrowind as well, I remember one of the first Fighters Guild quests, you went to sort of kill some giant rats, which is a staple of all RPGs, but the woman whose house you go to is obsessed with pillows, and she's got a special room dedicated to all her most expensive pillows.
It's got I like that sense of humour it's got, and Skyrim seems like it lost that a little bit, they got a little bit too serious. So I would like to see them have a little bit more fun with it.
I think for me, again, it's sort of an almost generic quest line, but the way that they did it was really, really well, really, really good. It was in Morrowind. It was the Fighters Guild quest, and it was the first game I played where it felt like you had a hunch, and if you followed it, there was actually a chance for them to sort of, follow it through. And basically, you're doing this series of quests for some people, and everything about the stuff that they're asking you seems a little bit fishy. They're basically sort of telling you to take out the Thieves Guild, and as you're progressing through the quest, you sort of come across another person who's giving you quests who's His name's Perseus Mercius, and he's the old guildmaster. And he's the sort of guy, like, if it was in a film, you'd expect him to be played by, like, Ian Glenn that plays Jorah Mormont. He's sort of this grizzled old veteran. Like, he's a bit cynical, but you can tell he's a good guy. And you kind of, I got to this point where you got given a mission by one quest giver, and then part of me thought, like, I'll go and ask Perseus about this, thinking, of course, that it won't matter if I go and ask Perseus, because he, like, that would be stupid. He won't respond to that, because that would be amazing. And then I went and showed him it, and it, like, amazingly, he just said, "Yeah, don't do this. Like, no, this is wrong."
The game, like, it second guessed you.
Yeah,
like it knew what you were going to do.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it was the first time in a game I think I really felt like, holy shit, I can, like, the game is just it's listening to me, and then the whole quest arc changes, and you end up, I guess, in a sort of a bit of a brutal way, murdering the people that are working. It turns out they're working for the Kimono Tong, which is like a sort of criminal syndicate in Morrowind, and they're sort of dead set against the Thieves Guild. So this kind of whole underlying sort of subplot of them trying to turn the Fighters Guild into their blunt instrument. But it was really, really well done, and I think you still get that in on all of the quests now. But I think more than that, just the general feeling in all of these games of, like, especially with Morrowind, with the sort of that big kind of huge sort of booming theme, you get the moment where you just stop and look around and sort of pan the camera around you, and you've got the music going, you everything. Just, you could be picking scrib jerky up or something, really, really banal. And it just has this sense of scale, and it's incredible. But there you go.
I'll mention another one of my moments briefly. Yeah. And I remember in Oblivion, I was just wandering around on horseback, and I stumbled upon, like, a sort of small village, and it wasn't like a built-up town, but it was full of, like, everyone was really, like, rude to me in it. All the NPCs were, like, really surly and rude, and they wouldn't let me stay at the inn or buy anything from the shop. I remember thinking it was really weird and, like, exploring, and then I remember coming back later as part of a quest and discovering that there were, like, cannibals and the basements that were locked. They were all, like, full of caged women and, like, bloody corpses. And I remember, like, I knew there was something weird about that place. So yeah, I remember that being a fun little moment. I can't remember what the town was called. It was so long ago. But anyone who's played Oblivion will probably remember that quest.
Yeah, I do remember.
But it was great to just stumble on something random like that and come back later and go, have my suspicions confirmed. For me,
the best thing about that is that I don't like rude people, and a game giving me an incentive to murder rude people for being, like, they didn't even need to be cannibals as far as I'm concerned. Just being rude dicks is enough for me to want to go and cut them through. But yeah, there you go. So, like, please give us your examples in the comments. Be really interested to hear them, because I think everyone, like Andy said, has their own Elder Scrolls anecdote. So there you go. That's pretty much all we've got for this week. Again, another push to subscribe now, because, as we mentioned before, I'm going to be going to QuakeCon and getting some hands-on with the game. So we don't want to do sort of specific questions for developers, because I think there's loads and loads of chance for you guys to do that. But in terms of gameplay, if there's anything specific that you want us to look into and cover in a future episode, let us know and hit subscribe now so you don't miss anything in the future. Next week I'm away, so our producer Dan heroically will be standing in my stead. Don't forget to follow Tamriel Herald and Olaf Skyrim on Twitter, and thank you very much for watching. See you next week.
See ya.